All right, guys, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I think we should start now. This is enough time now for everybody who wants to be a bit late. As I mentioned last time, for everybody who was here when we were discussing Plato, today we're going to be talking about Aristotle. Aristotle is one of the most famous philosophers from antiquity, and he has influenced a lot of philosophers after his life. Throughout the history of philosophy, many have continued to use his ethics as essential in any ethical discourse, in any ethical writings. Politicians used to consider Aristotle's view of the society as well as something very important and very, very reputable. So he was a polymath, very multi-talented genius, born in 384 BC, died in 322. And the book that we're going to be focusing tonight is the book on ethics, which is called Nicomachean Ethics. He wrote another one, which is similar to Nicomachean Ethics. It's called Eudaimonia Ethics, but because they're very similar, most of the scholars use Nicomachean Ethics as the main writing of Aristotle, considering his ethical teaching. So he was born in 384 BC in Stagira in Chalkidiki, which is about 50 kilometers away from Thessalonica in Greece now, but then it was the kingdom of Macedon. So his father, Nicomachus, was the royal physician of the king Amyntas. And Aristotle, apart from being an extraordinary philosopher, was also famous for teaching one of the greatest conquerors, Alexander the Great. So in 342 BC, Philip II, the king of Macedon, invited Aristotle to come and teach his son, who was then 17 years of age, Alexander of Macedon, later known as Alexander the Great. And Aristotle taught him for 3 years, although they have very well connected for the next 20 years, actually, all the way until Alexander's death. Aristotle taught Alexander everything he knew. Taught him science, taught him philosophy, ethics, politics, logic. But some historians think that Aristotle actually wasn't really happy with Alexander, because Alexander didn't necessarily pursue philosophy. He decided to become ruler of the world, and he conquered most of the known world in those days. And they disagreed about Alexander's attempt to introduce Persian culture into the Macedonian royal court. So Aristotle didn't like that, because Aristotle thought that they were inferior comparing to Macedonians in those days. It's interesting to say something that not many people know, unfortunately, that Aristotle was actually a Macedonian philosopher, not a Greek philosopher. But the common knowledge and common historical information always puts him in the same basket with other Greek philosophers. But he was not Greek, he was Macedonian. He never had Athenian citizenship, although he applied a few times, he never got it. And he was a resident alien in Athens, or metic, because he wasn't a citizen of Athens. So he wasn't Greek, he wasn't Athenian. And as metic, he didn't have many rights, he didn't even have property. So he and his family had to live in rented property all his life. And he was at the end, he was the student of Plato. Came to Plato's academia from the age of 17. He was the member there for 20 years. And after that, he organized his own school, which is called Lyceum, in 335 BC, which lasted all the way till 86 BC, when unfortunately was destroyed by Roman general Lucius Cornelius Sulla. So Sulla destroyed most of Athens, including Plato's Academia and also Aristotle's Lyceum in 86 BC. So Romans, for you, were not that much culture oriented at that time. Because of animosities towards Macedonians, who actually united and ruled cities of Greek territory as Athens, Sparta, and others, he was forced to abandon, he was extradited from Athens. And he famously said, I'm not going to allow Athenians to commit a second mistake, meaning second murder, directly related his thought to Socrates, who was actually executed by Athenian democracy, as you know, in 399. So we're going to focus today on ethics, but we can't really just jump into ethics before having a little bit of information about his metaphysics and also logic. So this is not a very not very easy attempt that I'm trying to do tonight, to actually put the whole Aristotle in half an hour lecture, because it's huge. Scholars usually spend a lecture of over 60 minutes just discussing one of the books from Nicomachean Ethics, which contains 10 books. So I will try tonight just to give you kind of insight, hopefully creating in your desire to get the book and read it yourself very much in detail, because there is so much to learn from that relatively small book, some 350 pages, but extremely dense with information. One of those, if you can say, eternal books. So before we get into ethics, a few words about metaphysics. He wrote Metaphysics as well. This is another book that is very interesting, obviously, for people who want to know that. And his primary metaphysical concept in metaphysics is actually form or essence. Form or essence. So, contrary to Plato's teaching that forms exist independently from material world, as you remember from the last talk, Aristotle didn't believe in that. For him, essence had to be found in particular objects, particular material examples of objects. And that form, that essence, can be then applied to the species of that particular sort. So for example, if we talk about table, Aristotle will start looking at the table and try to distinguish the essential characteristics of that table before going into something which is universal for all tables. While for Plato, the story was going other way around. Plato taught us that forms exist in topos noidos, in the separate world. They are the first main reality, and the material world is actually second reality, not that important, because the idea, the form of horse exists forever. There are so many different individual horses, they come and they go as material beings. So for Plato, everything that was material, particular, individual, could not be essential, everlasting, eternal, therefore could not be the primary. But Aristotle says, no, this is not true. We have to start looking at the world around us. So it's his common sense is so uncommon actually, that is really perplexing, that such a philosophy starts from really very, very basic, from the world around us, for objects around us, for the material. Either we are talking about plants, animals, humans, or material objects, is always starting from the particular example, specimens, and then going into universal. When it comes to metaphysics, as I said, his primary view was to distinguish the essence or nature of things. Now the question arises why we have abandoned that approach. That approach is now considered to be unscientific, because science today has to measure everything quantitatively, not qualitatively. And therefore anything that suggests that something has a nature or essence which is not quantitatively measured has to be sidelined as unscientific. So you see, Aristotle, some may say, oh well, it wasn't that scientific. No, actually he was very scientific, and you will see why. Aristotle says in order to reach the essence, the form of anything, we need to consider the causality of the things. Why things exist. So in our world now, when we say cause, we usually talk about force which influences some action or moves something. So the cause of this, you are the cause of my unhappiness. This is the cause of the movement. I apply the force to the material object and it moves. But for Aristotle, this was only one type of causes. You see how scientific he was. He talks about 4 different causes. He talks about material, formal cause, sufficient cause, and also final cause. So Aristotle has that the material cause is the matter, substance from which things are made. For example, this table is made of wood, so it's important to understand that material cause for this particular object table is wood, so is made of wood. Now the formal cause is the shape, the form of this object. So this object has a particular form. This is why it's called formal. The third cause is sufficient cause. So somebody had to make this table. So who is the creator of this table? Carpenter. So the carpenter is actually sufficient cause for this table. And finally, probably the most important cause, which will permeate later into his ethics as well as in logic, is the final cause. So why do we have this table? What is the function of this table? So without having the function or the aim or the purpose of an object, we will never create it. So as you see, there are 4 causes that he considers. So if you want to know anything about anything, you should start thinking about causes, and you may come to much better explanation of things that interest you, and avoid not to miss any of these 4 causes. Now when it comes to logic, Aristotle again is very commonsensical. He says logic actually focuses on 3 main areas. First, what are you talking about? Second, are your premises true? And third, do your premises justify the conclusion? You see, the whole essence of logic again considers form, considers the nature of thinking. He writes about logic in the book called Organon, and organon means tool. So tool for thinking is logic. We know that we have logic so that our sentences do not contradict, so that we make sense when we talk. This is why we have logic. Logic is like a glue which gives sense to our sentences. So how do you get there? Well, first of all, you need to know what are you talking about. Second, make sure that your premises are right. And then third, make sure that your conclusion comes out of your premises. And this is, if you can take it this way as well, like he gives an example, is climbing the mountain. So we start from induction, we are looking at the particular objects, and then trying to discover the essence of those objects. And once we discover the essence of those objects, we come to the conclusion of the universals. Once we are on the universals, we are on the top of the mountain. We can start using deduction and go down to particulars from the universals. Typical example of a syllogism that he uses, implementing everything that I just said, is, for example, saying that all people are mortal. This is deduction. Socrates, but how did we get there? We get there because we know from experience, from particular examples, that people die. So we concluded the essence of humans is that we are ephemeral, we are not eternal. So slowly we are getting to the understanding of what is essential, what is necessary, and what is accidental. And once we have that, we can say that all people are mortal. Now, if Socrates is a man, the conclusion has to follow that Socrates is mortal. So this is one of the typical syllogisms that he uses. He gives many examples of different syllogisms, but I don't want to go there now because it will require the whole lecture discussing his organon, which is quite complicated, clearly. Now, down to his ethics. His ethics is teleological, meaning that we are talking about investigation of telos. Telos is the end. So there is an end. So there is something that everybody strives towards. Everybody wants something. That end is going to be critical when we dip a little bit more into ethics. In Nicomachean Ethics, there are 10 books. I can't go into every single one of them. I will just mention a few and try to connect the dots so you're going to have an impression of his ethics as much as possible in this short time. And in the first book, Aristotle talks about good. And he says, what is good for man? What is that everybody wants? So many people say, oh, it's pleasure, it's maybe happiness, wealth, health. But Aristotle is not necessarily very happy with all the different answers. He is constantly looking for that end. So what is that end good in everything that everybody wants? What is that at which all things aim, Aristotle asks. He mentioned in the beginning, in the first book, that famous Eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness. But the meaning of Eudaimonia is a little bit deeper. It's called flourishing, or the well-being, fulfillment. So not necessarily just happiness, but we will use that word happiness in order to communicate easier his message. So if we are looking for happiness of man, we need to distinguish what makes man happy in this world. Clearly there are other living creatures. There are plants, there are animals, and they all have their end. They are aiming towards something. So it cannot be that we are happy if we live like plants, if we are happy if we live like animals. But there must be something that makes man happy, because man is different. So what makes man different? For that reason, he says that there are three different types of soul. One, Aristotle called vegetative soul. Another one he calls animalistic soul. And the third soul he calls intellectual soul. Now, he wants to say that not everybody is the same. He's not very egalitarian. He's not very politically correct, but because he's objective and he's real. So there are people who have predominantly vegetative soul. Vegetative meaning they will be happy with nourishment. You just give them food and water and they'll be very happy with it. Second type of soul is an animalistic soul, which is only focusing on desires and passions. So give some people like that, give them just their desires and passions and they'll be very, very, very happy. But there is another one type of the soul, which is called intellectual soul. And that intellectual soul is not really satisfied to be just nourished or allowed to enjoy its desires, but it needs something more than that. He has intellect and it requires intellectual happiness. So now we are getting closer to this understanding of Eudaimonia, which is for him that blessedness. That, he says, the masses consider the pleasure is happiness and that nothing is better in life than enjoyment. That's bovine existence, he said. He says cultured people identify good with honor. So they get involved in politics, but they get that honor from the society. This is the goal of political life. But the third type of life is contemplative, and these people see their pleasure in contemplation. We'll come back to this in the book 10, a little bit more in detail. But there is another requirement for happiness. Aristotle says one has to be happy throughout his life. Because if you have a good life and you're happy throughout, but then the last 10 years of your life you suffer, maybe from illness, or you love people that you love, they're close to you, they die, you can't be really saying that that man had a happy life. So happiness, in a way, requirement for happiness is that consistency throughout life, that one has to be happy throughout life so he can say, yes, I had a good, happy life. Aristotle talks about two types of virtues. He talks about moral virtues and he talks about intellectual virtues. Now, moral virtues, they are acquired by practice and habituation. So, if you do something morally right, that cannot be just done once or twice or for 5 years and then you stop doing it. You need to turn that into a habit and have it throughout your life, for a lifetime. So moral virtue is habituation. But habituation of what? How do we achieve moral virtue? What is the end? How do we get there? So this is in short his theory of golden mean. Golden mean means that one tries to avoid deficiency on one side and excess on the other. And that self-control temperance, which is related to our senses, for example, is best achieved when you are somewhere in the middle. So they call it, he is known as a golden mean. He calls it the mean. The mean is the middle position. So for example, when he talks about courage, bravery, this is the mean between the cowardness, somebody who is coward, who doesn't want to join the battle, or somebody who is reckless, who is just going to run into a battle, and lose his life. So this is excess. So he says, no, there has to be somewhere in the middle. You have to be afraid of your enemy, but you must not be a coward. So when you go there, you have to think about not be excessive in your attempt. Temperance also in food and drink. So, not eating, not drinking, or not having enough is deficiency, while having too much is obvious an excess. So if you do the too much, if you drink too much, you eat too much, you're not going to end up healthy, you're going to be sick, and therefore you will never get close to the happiness that you're trying. Now, saying that, Aristotle is aware that, again, very commonsensical, he's aware that cannot apply. There is no one size fits all. So people are different. For example, if you take number 2 and number 10, so arithmetically the mean is 6, but you cannot apply that in the real life with real people. Because if, for example, you have 2 pounds of food as a deficiency and you have 10 pounds of food as an excess, then one would say, okay, 6 pounds of food will be enough. But enough for who? Aristotle says, for a young person, young athlete, for example, 6 pounds of food, will be too much. But then for the champion wrestler, Milo, it will be not enough. So when he talks about golden mean, he is actually talking about relative golden mean, relative to the person who are we talking about. Not necessarily relative to the thing itself, to the food, but to the person. So if something is relative to the person, also to the time when this is happening, an environment in which it's happening, you see how much Aristotle allows individual creativity, individual flexibility, because he understands that we are not the same. And therefore, all this later on in history of philosophy, for example, Marxist ideas that everybody needs the same and everybody should have the same, they're simply not natural for Aristotle. The world doesn't work like that. Therefore, he says, by virtue I mean moral virtue, and virtue is a mean condition in as much as at hitting the mean. So you try to be always somewhere in the middle. Avoid excess and avoid deficiency. But you need to find yourself where you belong. Sometimes you may be closer to deficiency, sometimes you may be closer to excess, but this is something that he leaves to everybody to decide. Aristotle also pay attention in a book 8 about friendship. This is very interesting. And he asked, do people really friends? Do we need friends? Who needs friends to be happy? So he says, look, there are people who are very wealthy, very powerful. They have power, they rule the countries, they rule the world, conquerors and all this. So they definitely need friends, because what is the point of having all this money and all this power if you cannot share that with anybody? So they need friends in order to share it. On the other side of the spectrum, you have people who are very poor, who have nothing, not even money or food to eat. He says they also need friends, because only friends can help them in those times of austerity. So he says clearly everybody needs friends, but we can smell a problem there. And this is the reason why he talks about 3 different types of friendship. So the first type of friendship, which is quite common, unfortunately, is friendship based on utility or benefit. So you have a friend because that friend is rich and he can help you whenever you need it. All right? But this type of friendship is also, although it can be created very quickly, it can also disappear very quickly, because if your friend, who is your friend because of his wealth, all of a sudden loses his wealth, there is no reason for him to be your friend anymore. So you're going to be looking for another friend. I don't even know if that can be called friendship, but this is what he says. Another type of friendship is friendship based on attraction and pleasure. So he says you can have a young man to be a good friend because he's good looking, for example, but that is something that can also go. If he gets injured or diseased, or if he gets old, that will go, and that friendship is not going to last. Now again, what is the best type of friendship? For Aristotle, this is the third type of friendship. This is the friendship based on goodness. When you look into the person, what is good in that person? You're looking at his character or her character, not necessarily on the money or just the look, but you're concerned about the character. Character being unity of many virtues. So this type of friendship is not easy to form, but it's longest to last, because it's not influenced with the amount of money that your friend has. It's not influenced by the looks and the desire, but this is something which is difficult to happen, but when it happens, it lasts for the lifetime. And ultimately, he asks, how many friends can you have? Well, he says to have good friends is not easy, so you will never have many of them. You can have few, because this is very difficult. He also connects the different types of constitution with different type of relationship between people. So 3 different types of constitution, he takes it from Plato, up to the point, not exactly the same. He sees 3 different types: monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And also they are also the perversions of these 3 types of society. So monarchy being the best is the society in which monarch takes care of his subjects. And monarch does everything for his subjects, people that he rules, to have good life. So this is aristocracy. This is why it's called aristocracy, because Aristos in Greek means the best. So that type of society is aristocracy. Now, the perversion of this type of society is tyranny. And this is when you have a monarch who doesn't care about his subjects, he only cares about himself. So he doesn't care about the well-being of his people, but he only cares about himself. He even abuses people. We know that from history, it happens so often. Now the second type of constitution is aristocracy, and this is when group of people who are there by merit rule the society. So it's not one, there are many, but they're all aristocracy, from Aristos. They are the best, they are good, because they're there by merit. Now the perversion of that is democracy, and this is when people are there, the group of people is there because of their wealth or property. Tyranny, the perversion of democracy is democracy, when people take care of everything and not be competent, they usually destroy everything. And then democracy quickly changes into the tyranny again. So he links three types of families with three different types of society. So aristocracy, for Aristotle, is the adequate type of family is a family in which the father looks after his sons and helps them to flourish in life, to become the best that they can be. Now, there is obviously perversion of that type of family, which he mentions Persians, in which father, Aristotle says, is the tyrant, and he abuses his sons because they have different way of upbringing. So he doesn't like that. Now, what is reflecting to, what is responding to aristocracy? He says this is the family in which husband and wife rule the family correctly. But the problem arises when everybody has the same right or asks for the same right. And this is when democracy enters the family, when everybody does whatever everybody wants. And this obviously leads to the destruction of the family. This is Aristotle's view. In the book 10, Aristotle returns to Eudaimonia, and obviously being a philosopher, he wants to glorify now. Philosopher says his teacher Plato used to do, as he positioned the best rulers to be philosophers' rulers. These are the people who rule the society. But for Aristotle, these are actually people who can achieve that eudaimonia more than anybody else. So how is that possible? Aristotle says that eudaimonia is the virtue in accordance with the highest virtue, and that must be the virtue of the soul. He says intellect must be involved in this type of virtue. Intellect, because intellect makes us different than animals. Animals, plants, they don't have intellect. So what is the highest type of human soul? What is the highest part? Is our intellectual part. So virtue taken from intellectual part of the soul will lead to eudaimonia, which is blessedness. But why is eudaimonia so different than other type of virtues? The other type of happiness, for example, health or wealth, or just intellectual activity in science. So all this, it seems, as all these other activities aim towards the end, which is sufficient, which is end in itself. You can say, yeah, well, I'm exercising and eating healthy because health is my goal, is the ultimate end that I'm trying to achieve. Wealth, somebody can say, I want to be wealthy because wealth is the ultimate end. I just want to get there. This is just do it all my life. I'm working hard, making lots of money, having companies, very successful. Why? Because I want to achieve something which is the end in itself. and this is wealth. But Aristotle is not happy with it. Aristotle would say, no, you are not doing that for the wealth. You want all this wealth in order to get somewhere else from that. There is another step out, leap out from that health, wealth, honor. There is something else there. And he calls that happiness, eudaimonia, which is sufficient in itself. This is end in itself. There is nothing else. It's not instrumental like other virtues, but is simply the end of itself. And this is why he says this is the ultimate happiness that only people who contemplate can reach. So philosophical contemplation, according to Aristotle, is the one that can bring us there. To support his view, he also says the following. If we think about gods, what is the quality of gods? Gods don't have our type of pleasures because gods have everything. First of all, they are not ephemeral, they're eternal. Second, they don't need things that we need because they simply have everything. So what do they do? So he says they must pass all of their time is that eternal happiness, which is eudaimonia. And this is that divine part in us humans, which we can reach. But not everybody can reach them. There are people who work all their lives, make the money, and that's it. They never think about this. There are other people who achieve very successful business in medical science or physics or whatever, but they never think about eudaimonia. They never think about that blessedness, which is divine in us. This is what is eternal, because it's divine. This is the nature of eudaimonia, and is also self-sufficient. So the one who contemplates, he is self-sufficient. He doesn't need many people around. He doesn't even need to be honored, cherished. He doesn't even need to have friends, because he is self-sufficient. He has that divine power. So you see how he changes it then, and he introduces us much more to that eudaimonia. So how do we get there? What do we do in society? Society is obviously the most important for Aristotle, because Aristotle says we are social animals. We live in the society. So how do we get there? How do we educate people? So he says it's very important to teach people. Their intellectual development has to be taught by the society. Clearly, parents can do quite a lot of work, but not necessarily all the parents are competent enough to teach their children all that state can teach. So state is responsible for education of its subjects. Aristotle, again, being very commonsensical, says that before we start that type of education, we must have the character that we can educate. Not everybody has the same character. And because of that, he says, the necessity of the society is to introduce laws. Laws are based on punishment. And he says, it's clear that most of the people react better to punishment and to obedience to the laws in their education than to their own self-awareness of what is good and what is bad, which can only be attributed to the very few and very rare characters. So the state has to do everything which is in her power in order to educate people, to make them distinguish between good and bad. And clearly, all this knowledge, all this education would make no sense if it's not put in practice. And this is why prudence is another very important virtue for Aristotle, that everything that one learns has to be put in practice throughout the lifetime. So I hope I managed to bring you closer to Aristotle's ideas of moral virtues and goodness, and eudaimonia as the ultimate end, which is self-sufficient and only can be reached by those who contemplate philosophically. There is much more in the book that I mentioned, Nicomachean Ethics. So obviously, if I manage to create some curiosity in you, I think my job has been done. And now I'm going to give you the floor, and you can ask questions about everything. Thank you.